Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's first seed sowing tutorial live online. I want to, give you a few notes before we get started. This setup and live streaming a seed sowing tutorial. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's first seed sowing. Sorry about that. We will have a few technical probably difficulties or things that we're working with tonight because we have not had a seed sowing online tutorial before. So we just want to make sure we're doing everything we can to make your experience good and that you can see all the seed sowing. So I just want to introduce you to Wild Seed Project to start. If you don't know much about us and you've just maybe bought seeds from us from our website. We are a nonprofit based out of Southern Maine. We have an office in North Yarmouth, and we really, our mission is to inspire people to take action to repopulate native plants into our landscapes. And we believe that doing this, especially with seed-grown native plants, will help increase the biodiversity of our local landscapes as well as climate resilience. And we actually do a lot more than sell native seeds. We actually host a wide number of educational programs, a lot of online classes like this one tonight, and in-person walks, talks, and workshops. We have a very information-packed website. And I really encourage everybody to explore the rich blogs with amazing photos and information, great how-to information on anything to do with growing native plants. And in turn, we also put out an annual publication. This year, our publication was a native tree guide, and it's called Native Trees for Northeast Landscapes. And you can get it locally from different stores in the area, like the Mofga Freeport store, or you can get it online on our online website, our online store. And we also have an initiative called the Pledge to Rewild, which is a call to action to get as many people as possible to take the pledge and commit to planting natives where they live and adopting more mindful landscape practices. And so I just encourage you all to take part. It's free. It's a really great way to get free guidance tools and resources towards your own rewilding activities. And from that, I just want to bring it over to Heather McCargo, who will lead our seed sowing tutorial. Afterwards, we'll have a short Q&A where we might get a few of your questions. So bear with me for a few moments and I transfer it over to Heather.
It's how to grow plants.
I was like, oh, if it's like something that's.
And I just want to remind everyone to go into speaker view if you can. That's if on the top right corner of your screen, and that's going to give you the best view of Heather and the seed sowing tutorial. So just gonna make sure that we have our top view of the seed sowing in here too. Andrea, do you know what Caroline is called again? She switched her name.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's called seed sowing.
Okay. There we go. And Heather, if you turn your sound on.
Okay, I think, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hi, Cutie. I'm in a seed sowing tutorial.
Can you hear me? Somebody has
yeah.
You're good to go. I'm good to go.
I'm right.
Okay, great. You're ready to go.
Okay, somebody's talking in the background. I don't know who can tell, Anna. Sending a funny echo. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to walk you through the steps to sowing some native seeds, and I'm thrilled that all these people want to do it. So first, I'm going to show you the list of what you need to do it. The first is you need pots, and it can be any recycled or new plastic pot. Clay pots actually work very well. The fiber pots don't work well because native seeds grow much more slowly than your vegetable and annual flowers, and those are designed to break down. So some heavy duty pot, this is just a 4-inch square pot. I sow most of our seeds in these small pots and then move them up to bigger pots, but you can, if you'd rather use a bigger pot, a 6-inch round one is also good. Then you need good organic potting soil. And there's lots of great brands depending on where you live, and you put it in the pot and you press it down firmly. That is very important. In fact, using the bottom of another pot works well to press it down. Then you need labels. And again, wooden labels don't, I know they're nice because they break down, but they will decay long before you have, sure what your plant is. So a plastic label will last a long time. And I like to write the name on with a pencil, a good soft lead pencil as opposed to a magic marker. They really, they say they're indelible, but they're not, and they don't last. Whereas the pencil will last for years, and then you can actually erase them and reuse them. So I reuse these plastic pots and labels for years. You also need, for covering the seeds after you've sown them, you need coarse builder sand, and this is available at any hardware store. In the wintertime, you want to make sure you're not getting sand that has de-icing salts in it, but it'll often say on the bag for landscaping. It's just coarse sand of medium texture, not all super fine the way playground sand is. You'll need something to water your pots with, and ideally with some sort of spray nozzle. And that's true during the whole growing season. You can, with winter seed sowing, it's possible after you've sown the seeds to put them in a dish of water and let it get moist that way. And then the seeds need to be covered. The pots need to be covered with wire to keep rodents, mice, chipmunks, cats, dogs from digging in them. And this is just also available at any hardware store in small quantities. It has little 1/2-inch square holes. Chicken wire, the holes are too big. Mice and chipmunks can get through that. And then of course you need the seeds. So if you're in the Northeast, you can get Wild Seed Project seeds. If you're in Georgia, look for a source of native seed from down there, or California or the Midwest, but some nice straight species native seeds. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you one of the things that people get confused about is how to most efficiently sow the seeds in the pot. And I've got in right here, this is black-eyed coneflower. It's one of the few native perennials that will actually bloom the first year from seeds. And they're tiny little black seeds. And so I'm just going to sprinkle it on the white plate so you can see. This is the technique I use where if you're right-handed, put your seeds in your left hand and then sprinkle them in the pot. I'm not going to sow these seeds into these 3 pots I have because they're so black you won't be able to see them with the potting soil. So the best time to sow native seeds is any time starting around now through early to midwinter. And about 2/3 of our native seeds require a winter cold period outside to germinate. Not all of them do, but 2/3 to 3/4 of them do. So therefore, that's why fall and winter is the best time to sow them. Then they will get them. There are species like asters do not require a winter cold period to germinate, but if you sow them outside at this time of year in the fall and winter versus waiting till the spring, they will germinate earlier and they will put on more growth than if you sowed them in the spring. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to actually sow the seeds. So I've got 3 different pots and 3 different species. First ones I'll show you are the largest seeds. This is swamp milkweed. It's one of our native milkweeds that makes a particularly nice garden plant. And again, I sprinkle them And they can be sown very closely together. That's something that's really different about native seeds in the pot. So I'm just showing them you first on the plate so you can see how, so because this pot is smaller, they'll end up about this close together. And they do not mind that at all. Native seeds are very different from vegetables and annuals, which grow really quickly and get stressed if they're too close together. Most of our native wildflowers are perennials and they're more slow growing, and they really benefit from being close to each other in their juvenile stage. So again, I'm going to put them back into my left hand because I'm right-handed. And I'm now going to sprinkle them in the pot. I try to spread them as evenly as I can, but I don't worry about it too much. Then you put your label in and don't leave the label sticking out like this. That's too tempting for squirrels and chipmunks who will yank it out or switch it different pots. Push it way down deep into it. And that's how it's going to stay all winter. Then you take your coarse sand, and it's good to sprinkle it on just like both the seeds and the sand. It's almost like you're sprinkling, when you're using salt on food, you just start sprinkling it a little bit at first. And so different size seeds need different amount of covering of the seed. And a good rule of thumb is that you bury the seeds to the depth of the thickness of the seeds. So these swamp milkweed seeds are about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. So that's about how much sand I'm going to put on top of them. And because they're sort of flat, sometimes once I water them and take them outside, a few of the seeds will float up above the sand, and I'll just use my little pinky finger to push them down. So there, that one's the swamp milkweed. Now I will do blue vervain. These are very tiny. They're very small seeds. Again, I like to take them from the package, put them in my left hand, and then sprinkle them. And these seeds are less than 1/8 of an inch long and probably a 64th of an inch wide. So they're tiny little seeds. And just so you can see how many, that's the other thing, is how many seeds can germinate together in a pot. Later, you can move them to a pot. So now I'm going to take them and sprinkle them on the top of the soil. And these are little seeds, so think of it like sprinkling salt on your food, where you're being very careful and not putting lumps anywhere and not too much. And you probably can't really, it's too dark for it to really show up. And then, so these were small seeds, so therefore they only get, 1/16 of an inch of sand covering them. There's some seeds that are even smaller than this, like the cardinal lobelias, the native lobelias, like cardinal flower or great blue lobelia. Those seeds that are dust-like, they actually do not get covered at all with sand. They're just sown on the soil surface. Put that label in, and again, push it down. Don't be tempted to leave it out so you can see what the label says. Okay, and then now I'll show you New England asters. So the asters all have tiny little seeds with a fluffy appendage on them that helps them fly around in the wind this time of year. So you can see what they look like. A bigger seed company, we're a small nonprofit, might have machines that will separate the fluffy appendage, but it's not necessary for the sowing the seeds, and that's not what we do. So again, they're going to go as evenly as I can get them. in the pot. I like to go all the way to the corners of the pots. And then the actual seed is very small, so these are also only getting lightly covered. One of the reasons sand makes it such a good covering for the seeds is lots of seeds need some light to germinate. And when people fail with seed sowing, usually what happens is they bury the seeds too deeply. The other common way that people don't have success is that the pots dry out once the seedlings started to germinate, that, and they can't tolerate that. So then I've sowed my seeds, and now I'm not going to water them because I don't want to make a mess on my desk. But before I take them, if it was raining, I would not bother to water them. But if it's dry out, I would water them before taking them outside. That will ensure that the seeds have good contact with the soil. But that's the only time here in the Northeast that I will need to water them until sometime in April next spring. There will be plenty of moisture outside over the winter. So then you take, I've already chosen my spot out in my yard. You want a shady spot where you're going to put the pots, and then you need to cover them with the wire mesh. That's really important. Otherwise, I can guarantee the squirrels or chipmunks will get in there and plant an acorn in there, or pull your label out, or dig around. If you're sowing nuts or maple seeds, then you really need to make a wire cage, because those seeds are so delicious that they will lift this up. But with these kind of seeds, you can just rest a piece on top. And then I take this outside to a flat location in the shade. North side of the building, as long as you're not under a drip line, under a wire patio table or bench, somewhere out of the way of foot traffic. And the shade is really important, because come spring, a warm spring day, you don't want the pots to dry out while you're away at work. And so if they're in the shade, you won't have these huge swings of moisture, because again, the consistent moisture and the sort of nurturing environment of this, which is what really ensures a high germination rate with the native seeds. And so some of these species will start germinating really early in the spring, like sometimes as early as late March or early April. Other species will wait till the warmer weather in May. And then people are very tempted to quickly then divide up the pots and plant them out in their garden. And I do not recommend doing that. The easiest thing to do is to take your whole pot of seedlings. Once you start to notice it's drying out more often because the seedlings have grown maybe an inch or two tall and their roots are all the way down to the bottom, so they're taking up the whole space, then you can just take this whole pot of seedlings and put it in a much bigger pot and let it grow on that way for the summer. It is possible to divide them up into little clumps, but that does disturb the roots more. So if you actually just move this pot into a much bigger pot, you won't get any break in the growth. And with some species like New England aster or the milkweed, you can have seedlings that are a foot, even 18 inches tall that first summer. And the milkweed, for instance, monarch butterflies will still come and land on those juvenile plants. They don't need the flowers. Let's see. So I think that's it. Now I was just going to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was fantastic. We do have a lot of wonderful follow-up questions here. One question is, what is the best soil mix for seed sowing?
There's so many good organic potting soils now. So make sure it's an organic potting soil and a compost-based one, one that has, has been made with hot compost that's killed the weed seeds, but still is filled with all the microorganisms, the bacteria and fungi that are beneficial to, all, soil and seed growth. So, there's lots of different brands now. I prefer, like I said, the compost-based ones to just a sterile potting mix with that's been inoculated with the mycorrhizal fungi, because it doesn't have, might have the fungi added into it, but it's just one that's been cultured in a laboratory versus a compost-based potting soil has, you know, potentially thousands of different beneficial bacteria and fungi in it. So there's lots of different brands.
Do you have any favorite brands?
Well, in New England, in Maine, the ones I often use are Coast of Maine, and I can't even remember. There's Vermont. You don't need a special seed starting mix. Like this is just the Coast of Maine potting soil mix. A lot of the seed starting mixes they're very fine, and they have a lot of added, even if it's organic, a lot of added nutrients in it, more than our native seedlings need. You know, our native plants don't require the high nutrients needs that your vegetables and annual flowers are. So for vegetables, those high nutrient organic ones are great. But you know, these pots, sometimes in the middle of the summer, I might put a little seaweed, liquid seaweed on them. But for the most part, they don't need, if you've got a good organic potting soil, they don't need a lot of extra nutrients in that. But if you're in doubt, liquid seaweed is what I would use.
Great. And I think you might have gone over this a little bit, but how many seeds to a pot do you generally recommend?
Well, with our packages of seeds, which have anywhere typically from 50 to sometimes 150 seeds per pot, I would do the whole package in the pot and then later move it to a bigger pot. So I like to do them close together. Then, like I said, when you have, I don't know, I just feel like the native seedlings, you'll have higher germination if you crowd them, and then you can move them later. So I'll get people who will want to do like one seed to a pot. Don't do that. Do a minimum of 20 seeds. And like I said, I often do, you'd be shocked how many seedlings I get germinating in a pot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then other questions that we have are kind of related to what happens after you've sown the seeds and you put them outside. What happens next? So are you allowing those seeds to get buried in the snow?
Yep. So what happens next? You know, to me, the perfect day to sow it is I did it, you know, sometime over the winter holidays when you're sick of people. And then I carried my pots outside, and it was either snowing that night or a light rain. That would be the perfect weather for me. So let's say it was rain, you know, because we keep having warmer and warmer weather. Let's say it rained, and then the next day it got really cold and froze, and then we got some snow. So freeze, thaw, rain. These native seeds, they have a much heavier seed coat than our domesticated plants. You know, your lettuce seeds have been selected over time to germinate all quickly, and the seed coat is really thin. The native seed coats are much heavier, and it's that freeze and thaw. So don't worry if you got 2 feet of snow and then a rainstorm and then a midwinter thaw, then an ice storm. Our native seeds don't mind that at all. In fact, they benefit from it. And I've even occasionally, there's some species that will germinate even in the middle of the winter, like the perennial perennial flax linum peren lewisii. That one, if you've ever seen it in a while, I've seen it in the Rocky Mountains, but it grows all the way through the prairie states. That one will sometimes germinate midwinter, and then it freezes, and it doesn't matter. So trust that these seeds know when to germinate. Now, I suppose with our radically shifting climate, some of them will get messed up, but it doesn't matter. And the varied temperature throughout the winter, they actually thrive on that. In fact, you know, a lot of people who are experienced horticulturalists do their winter stratification in a refrigerator, and that is where it's only 40-degree temperature, and that is there's not enough freeze and thaw, and so it doesn't as successfully break up the heavy seed coat.
Great. And then, so what happens after that? How do you know when to take the mesh off, when to start dividing them and putting them in larger pots, or even when to plant them into the ground?
Well, I leave the mesh on as long as I can. It sort of depends what kind of trouble you have in your yard. Usually by May, the squirrels have turned their attention elsewhere. So then I can often take it off and the little plants are growing up through it. So like I said, I suggest when your pot starts to feel full, not to divide it, to just put it in a much bigger pot, and then wait till September to do the real dividing and planting in your garden. It's really easy to be tempted to plant them out. You know, you're so excited about your seedlings to plant them in your garden in June or July. But unless you're the most attentive person in the whole world and are gonna check on them 3 or 4 times a week and make sure they're not getting overtaken by weeds or drying out, if you instead keep them in your little nursery, so these are little 4-inch pots, you could have 9 different species in 1 square foot, and then when you moved them up to gallon pots, that would still only take up 2 or 3 square feet. You know, it takes up very little space, and it's much easier to keep them watered, and you'll get to learn the plant better because you can watch, you'll see it every day, versus once you get it out in your landscape, especially if there's a drought year, you'll lose a lot. So wait till September to plant them.
Mm-hmm. And I have a couple of questions that just relate to, knowing how much to divide up the seedlings in the pots. They'll come up as looking like kind of crowded seedlings, but how much do you end up dividing them up? And do you have to divide them at all?
No, I recommend, if you think they're really crowded, I would maybe take the pot and divide it into 4 clumps and put those clumps each in 1 gallon pot. But for the most time, let's say you have 40 germinating swamp milkweed seeds in your little pot, pot. You put that in a gallon pot and don't divide it at all till the fall. In fact, those grow so quickly. If they're really happy, you might even move them into a 2-gallon pot, but without dividing them. The dividing them, it's what a commercial nursery obviously needs to do, but it has a cost in that it disrupts the root system, and they will grow more if you don't divide them up.
Great. And I think there are a lot of people who want to know a little bit more about why you would sow something in a pot versus direct sowing it into the ground.
So all soil is filled with seeds. All the soil out there in your landscape is filled with seeds. And unfortunately, most of them aren't native seeds. Most of them are probably weed seeds and things you don't want. So the native seedlings will not be able to compete with all those weed seeds in there. So sowing the seeds in your vegetable garden, when people do a real seeding of like a native meadow, they have spent a year preparing the site to get rid of all the weed seeds. You sow them into pots, or you could make a seed bed. You could take logs and make an edge and then fill it with good organic potting soil. It's really important to have weed-free soil. The weeds, they're called weeds because they grow really quickly. They're annuals. And you toss them out in the landscape. Most in plants, most of the seeds that get dispersed don't land somewhere that they end up germinating, becoming a plant, either because they landed where there were too many weeds around, or they landed in the middle of the road, or they landed in a dry spot and they want wet, or they landed in a wet spot and they want dry. When you sow the native seeds in a controlled environment like this, you can have almost all the seeds germinate and become plants. So it's a much more efficient use of all the seeds. I know it sounds really exciting to toss the seeds out in your landscape, but you won't have the success that you do in pots.
Thank you so much. This was a really wonderful tutorial, and I hope that everybody got some new information out of it and some new how-to. We will be doing more of them. So there's 2 more this year, one in December and one in January. So you're welcome to sign back up and take another. Maybe you'll get more questions answered. And I just also want to let everybody know that we have this wonderful member benefit. Once you become a Wild Seed Project member, you can actually take part in monthly Q&A sessions and get all sorts of different kinds of native plant seed sowing and native plant growing questions answered by Heather McCargo and myself. So I encourage you to become members to take part in those sessions because they're extremely valuable. And for many other reasons for supporting all of the work that we do as well. So thanks again, and we'll hopefully see you next time. Bye-bye. I'm going to end.